For everything there is a season, and a time for every matter under heaven. A time to be born, and a time to die. A time to plant, and a time to pluck up what is planted. A time to kill, and a time to heal. A time to break down, and a time to build up. A time to weep, and a time to laugh. A time to mourn, and a time to dance. A time to cast away stones, and a time to gather stones together. A time to embrace, and a time to refrain from embracing. A time to seek, and a time to lose. A time to keep, and a time to cast away. A time to tear, and a time to sow, and a time to keep silence, and a time to speak. A time to love, and a time to hate. A time for war, and a time for peace. What gain has the worker from his toil? I have seen the business that God has given to the children of man to be busy with. He has made everything beautiful in its time. Also, he has put eternity into man's heart, yet so that he cannot find out what God has done from the beginning to the end. I perceive that there is nothing better for them than to be joyful and to do good as long as they live. Also, that everyone should eat and drink and take pleasure in all his toil. This is God's gift to man. I perceive that whatever God does endures forever. Nothing can be added to it, nor anything taken from it. God has done it, so that people fear before him. That which is already has been. That which is to be already has been. And God seeks what has been driven away. Moreover, I saw under the sun that in the place of justice, even there was wickedness. And in the place of righteousness, even there was wickedness. I said in my heart, God will judge the righteous and the wicked, for there is a time for every matter and for every work. I said in my heart with regard to the children of man, that God is testing them, that they may see they themselves are but beasts. For what happens to the children of man and what happens to the beast is the same. As one dies, so dies the other. They all have the same breath, and man has no advantage over the beasts, for all is vanity. All go to one place. All are from the dust, and to dust all return. Who knows whether the spirit of man goes upward and the spirit of the beast goes down into the earth? So I saw there is nothing better than that a man should rejoice in his work, for that is his lot. Who can bring him to see what will be after him? So reads.
Well, good evening, everybody. If you have your Bible, please have it open at the passage we read in Ecclesiastes chapter 3. Last July, I had a big birthday. 80. No, 60. And there was a bit of subterfuge, a bit of behind-the-scenes trickery going on. And I was bought a turntable. My wife, together with Brian Walsh, with a bit of technical advice, and my son as well, all got together and arranged for me to have this turntable so I could once more play my vinyl records. And that both delighted me and appalled me. It delighted me because I like vinyl records. Downloads are all very well and streaming and all that modern guff. But, there's nothing quite like having a gatefold record to open up and, oh, look at this, it's great. So that was great. What appalled me was the price of them nowadays. How much? Anyway, so that's a problem I've got to overcome. And one of the albums I bought this year is by a man called Fish. Okay, oh yes, Fish. Now, some of you may know who he is. Yes, 1, that's good. Okay, that's better than normal. Do you want to feel? Yeah. Now, Fish was a singer in a group called Marillion back in the 80s. They did a few albums, and since then he's gone solo. And a couple of years ago, he said, this is going to be my final album. This is the last one I'm going to do. And it's a double album. It's great. So I bought this double album. And to give you an idea of what it's like, some of the titles on there, there's a song called Rose of Damascus, which is about refugees coming from Syria. There's a song called Waverley Steps, which is a man who loses everything and ends up begging on the street. Waverley Steps is a railway station, and he sits outside and begs. There's a song called Garden of Remembrance. And this song has the most moving video I've ever seen. And it's about, Fish wrote about his mum and his dad. And in the final years of his life, his dad suffered from Alzheimer's. And this song is about their relationship and all the difficulties. So it's quite a poignant song. And the album finishes with the title track. And the title track is Weltschmerz. Now, what's that? I thought it sounds a bit like a nest of tables you get in IKEA, but that's not what it is. Weltschmerz is a German word, and the literal translation of it is wailed pain. And the idea behind Weltschmerz is that you look at the world and you say, well, look, it's not the way it should be. It's not right. All these terrible things going on. Whenever we put on the news, there's always something bad. Well, that's Weltschmerz. And if you've ever felt Weltschmerz, well, Achtung, this passage is for you. That's all be German now, I'm sorry, I'm finished. But even if you've never felt that word, you should still be interested in these verses. Ecclesiastes is a book that was written by an old man to young people. So wherever you fit on that spectrum, or wherever you think you fit on that spectrum, maybe you still self-identify as a young person, and maybe you're not, but wherever you are on that spectrum, I sometimes think I'm a young person, and then my back and my knees, and my waistline and my hairline tell me otherwise. But yeah, wherever you are, this is for you. Because this book has been called the most contemporary book in the Bible. And it's called that because it deals with the dominant worldview in our society today. A worldview that's called secular, that's called materialistic, that looks at things and says, there's only this world and nothing else. And he's going to deal with this, not by having a cosy fireside chat, not by sidling up to you and putting his arm around you. But it's more like a madman with staring eyes and wild hair shouting at you. And he's going to shout, your life is built on an illusion and you are going to die. And how does the writer do this? Well, I want to give you two little short illustrations which explain how the book of Ecclesiastes works. I used these a few years ago when I spoke in chapter 1, but I think they help us point us in the right direction. The first was something I heard in a chat show once. And this actor was talking about when he was a young boy. I can't for life remember who it was. But he said that once when he was, 10, 11 years old, he bought a packet of cigarettes and took them home. And he hid them in his pocket, in his jacket. And it's bad fortune for him, his mum checked his jacket and found them on the very first day that he bought them. And she said to him, wait till your father gets home. Those dreaded words. And so he said he sat there sort of in trepidation all day, and in the evening his dad was sitting outside on the porch and said, son, come out here. And he opened the pack of cigarettes. And the boy thought, what's he going to do? And he picked one out and he gave it to him. He said, there you are, son, light it. So he did. He said, now smoke it. And so he took a tentative sort of puff of the cigarette. And his dad said, no, not like that. Breathe in the smoke right into your lungs. So he did. And his dad said, carry on. And he finished the cigarette, and his dad said, right, now have another one. And another one. And another one. And I don't know how many he got through. It wasn't a full pack. Before he keeled over and was sick on the floor. I'm not sure what social services have to say about that nowadays, but you know that this is going back some time ago. And that's the bit how Ecclesiastes is going to do. He's going to say, look, here's the life you want to lead it. The other story I've got, quite predictably, is from Fawlty Towers. There's an episode of Fawlty Towers where Basil Fawlty is in the kitchen, and he's got to make a Waldorf salad, and he doesn't know what's in it, and he can't find any of the ingredients, and he's panicking. And his wife Sybil comes out and said, look, don't panic. I'll make the Waldorf salad. I've found the apples. And Basil says to her, oh, great, let's have an apple party. Everyone brings an apple and shoves it down somebody else's throat. Well, that's what Ecclesiastes is going to do as well. It's going to say, you want to live without God? Let's do it. You know, at the moment, a few weeks ago, I started reading J.C. Ryle's Practical Religion. It's a very helpful book, and it looks at things you should be doing in the Christian life, very basic things. And says, look, if you want to be a real Christian, this is how you should live. Well, Ecclesiastes is practical secularism. If you want to lead a secular life, says the writer, I've been there, I've done that. I've got the T-shirt and the mug and the key ring and the fridge magnet. I've got it all. Now, the traditional view is that this was written by Solomon. You know, a few years ago, I spoke on chapter 1, and I was sort of 50-50, is it, isn't? I wasn't sure. Now, after studying this chapter, I think I'm more 80-20, there probably wasn't Solomon. One of the commentaries I read said, well, the author of this book wrote the first part and the last part. And in between, it's all Kohelet. I've been practicing saying that word all week. Kohelet. I kept going quick, the teacher. But no, it's Kohelet. And Kohelet is a man of wisdom and a man of insight. But it's only under the sun. It's only worldly. It's only secular. And this chapter will help us to avoid two extremes. One extreme is secularism, which we talked about. The other extreme is we can call the prosperity gospel. That says, you know, you become a Christian and everything's fine. Nothing can go wrong. But this book's going to tell you life's hard and then you die. And in the West, we try to be cosseted from both of these things. We try and sweep them under the carpet. The difficulties of life, the reality of death, we don't want to know about that. So what are the problems of secular life that this chapter deals with? I want to see three. First of all, verses 1 to 8. We'll see the problem is that there's no power. What I mean by that is stuff just happens to us and we can't do anything about it. Then number 2, in verses 9 to 15, we'll see that there's nothing to be gained. There's no point. No power, no point. And then finally, verse 16 to the end, we'll see that there's no prospects. There's no prospect of justice in this life or in the next. Men and women are just like animals. They just die. So he starts off, verses 1 to 8, no power. Now, these are probably the most famous words in Ecclesiastes, thanks to the 60s song that was mentioned before. And I think to understand these words, we have to remember that they're descriptive, not prescriptive. They're describing something. They're not telling us what to do. So these things are listed. They're not things you should put in your diary and say, well, I'll plan to do that. Rather, they're things that happen to you. So you don't need to get your planner out and say, well, Tuesday, I'm going to throw some stones, you know. Thursday, I won't do any embracing. Sorry, ladies. Or whatever it might be, you know. Saturday, I'll go dancing. Does that mean I have to watch Strictly? Definitely not. That's not what it means. So the summary of these verses is that things happen to us that are outside of our control. That's certainly true of the first two. There's a time to be born and a time to die. We have no say over when we're born. We try to do all we can to put off dying, but we can't stop that either. And with all the advances in healthcare and technology that we have, these verses are still true. There's a time to plant. There's a time to pluck up what has been planted. Again, we have no say. The picture here is a farmer. You know, when a farmer goes out, he can't say, well, I think I'll plant in January because the ground's too hard. He can't say, I'll harvest in June because the crop's not ready. It's all foisted upon him. Verse 3, there's a time to kill and a time to heal. What's all that about? Well, again, he's writing to people in an agricultural economy. You know, here's a shepherd. He'll do all he can to look after his sheep. He'll care for them. He'll protect them from animals. If one gets lost, he'll go and seek it. I'm sure you've seen those things on TV about farmers in this country where they have to go out into these massive snowdrifts, digging up to try and get these sheep who have got stuck in them. And they do all that to protect them and help them and heal them. And then what do? They kill them. So there's a time for both. Verse 4 is dealing with emotions. And the first two are personal and the second two are corporate. There's a time to laugh and a time to weep. There's a time to mourn and a time to dance. Well, we'd all rather laugh than weep, wouldn't we? We'd all rather more than dance, the other way around. Well, actually, I hate dancing, so I'd possibly rather more, I don't know. But it's certainly a tougher choice for me. But the point is, we will see both. But they won't be at a time of our choosing. Verse 5, there's a time to scatter stones, there's a time to gather stones in. Well, you know, there's a few wacky explanations of this verse that I came across. Sadly, it's not about skimming, which I thought, was a great thing to do as a kid. Again, I think it's something corporate. They would scatter stones onto a field when an enemy was coming, so the field couldn't be used by the enemy to grow things. They would gather stones in off the road to clear the way for someone. A time to embrace, a time to refrain. Listen to Alistair Begg on this verse. And he said, a time to refrain from embracing is the favourite verse of prospective father-in-laws everywhere. Look, son, there's a time to refrain from embracing, take your hand off my daughter, sort of thing. Verse 6, there's a time to seek, there's a time to lose, or maybe a better translation is to give up seeking. We'd save a lot of time if we could identify when they are, wouldn't we? I think we fall into two extremes. It's like Robert the Bruce versus Homer Simpson. Robert the Bruce says, if at first you don't succeed, try again. Watching the spider in the cave. Homer Simpson says, if at first you don't succeed, give up. Well, the truth usually lies somewhere in the middle. And if we knew when it was, we don't just give up. But then again, there is a time when we do have to give up. Verse 6 continues, there's a time to keep, there's a time to cast away. Again, that's difficult to identify, isn't it? I can't be the only old fella who's dug T-shirts out of the bin. We can't throw this one out. We can't throw those footy programmes out. That cost me 10p in 1972. I can't throw that out. I've got a grandson. He was just 5 a few weeks ago. We were at his house, and he said, I'm collecting things. I've got 2 collections. I said, what are they? He said, sticks and feathers. I said, brilliant. And he took us out to the side of the house by the garage, and he said, here's my collection of sticks. I said, that's great. And there was loads of them. What about your feathers? He said, well, they were there, but they'd blown away. So, there you go. Verse 7, there's a time to tear and a time to sow. There's a time for silence. There's a time to break the silence. Now, again, possibly this verse is talking about mourning. When people were mourning, they would rip their garments. But when the time of mourning was over, they would sew them again. They would fix them. You know, we think of Job's friends, when they came to see him, the first thing they did was keep silent. It was one of the few good things they did. There's a time to love and a time to hate. There's a time for war and a time for peace. You know, no one can really argue with those things. These things all happen. But so what? Well, under the sun, we have no control over them. We have no power over them. You know, that old poem Invictus about being the captain of your soul. You know, that's rubbish. It's not even true for those who are rich and powerful and strong. They can't control things. It's certainly not true for the rest of us. So there's no power. Number 2, he says, there's no point. Verse 9 to 15. There's no point, given that work achieves nothing. So in verse 9, he's returning to the very first thing he complained about in the book, in chapter 1 and verse 3. In chapter 1, he said, if everything is meaningless, then what's the point of doing anything? And now in chapter 3, he says, look, if everything is controlled, if we've got no power, same conclusion, what's the point of trying anything? You know, in the county fairs in the United States of America in the late 19th, early 20th century, one of the popular attractions was a large wooden maze that they would carry into the town and place in the fair. And in the centre of this wooden maze, they would place a few crumbs. And then they would get a collection of rats, okay, and set them free into the maze. And the idea was the punters would come along and would bet, I guess, on which rat is going to reach the middle first to get the crumbs. And it's from that practice that we get the term the rat race. People doing all they can, running as much as they can, for what? For next to nothing. And it's taken from the world of commerce, and he's saying, look, if we invest, we expect to get something back, some gain, some surplus. If you're toiling, if you're working, you expect a reward. And here's this man. In the previous chapter, he's talked about all the success he had and the fame and the achievements. See, the problem is he's not saying, I can't pay the bills, I've got a dead-end job. He's saying any work is pointless. There's no enduring benefit from anything. So there's no point given that work achieves nothing. There's no point, secondly, because we're given a glimpse of something that can't be attained. The problem is we're bound by time, but we're wired for eternity. Verse 11, he talks about eternity being in our hearts. And this is that restlessness, that otherness. I'm sure as you go through Ecclesiastes, you'll quote Augustine a few times about the heart being restless till it finds its rest in thee. I'm sure you'll look at C.S. Lewis a few times. He had this sense of some otherness. That's what drove him to Christ, that there must be something more. And some look at these verses and say, well, there's a bit of a glimmer of hope here. You know, in verse 12, he talks about being joyful. In verse 13, about eating and drinking and taking pleasure. But others say, well, no, it's just resignation. He's just shrugging his shoulders and saying, well, we might as well eat and drink and make the best of it, because that's all we've got. And then he says, verse 14, in contrast, everything God does lasts forever and can't be changed. So if that can't be changed, what's the point? There's no gain from work, and there's a sense that there must be something more, and it's frustrating. You know, I remembered somebody, I had it back in my mind, these famous last words that somebody had said. When they died, they said, I'm so bored of it all. And I couldn't for the life of me remember who it was, so I put it into Google. And it turns out it was Winston Churchill. Now, if you know anything about Churchill, you know he led an extraordinary life. Not just, you know, the stuff in the war, which maybe is famous, but his early life as well. He did incredible things. You know, he fought over in North Africa. He fought in the Boer War. He got taken prisoner. He escaped. And then he came back and, became prime minister. He did a few things. And yeah, he looks at his life. He says, I'm so bored of it all. I put that Google search in, and underneath Churchill, it said, 100 things to do if you're bored. I was like, what's that? And he said, number 1, make a tie-dye T-shirt. And I thought, wow. What an answer. I thought it was bad. My mum used to say to me, go and tidy your room. But, this go and make a tie-dye T-shirt. That's what the world has to offer. And this is the man saying, look, here's another cigarette. Here's another apple forced down your throat. Not that there's just no power. There's no point in doing anything. And thirdly and lastly, there are no prospects. Verse 16 to 22. There's no prospects in this life. In place of justice, in place of righteousness, there's only wickedness, he says in verse 16. This is one of the verses that makes me think Solomon probably wasn't the author. After all, in Israel, who is responsible for justice? It's the king. But here's this man saying, under the sun, there's no justice. People sometimes in our society like to talk about karma and think, well, wouldn't it be good, if you do something good happens. If you do something bad happens. Well, that's a nice idea, but it's not true, is it? We all know it's not true. We all know it's not just kids who say it's so unfair. Everyone says it. The wicked do prosper. Too often, crime does pay. Too often, the undeserving live the life of Riley. I thought about this in terms of the arts. You look at someone like Vincent van Gogh. Now, his paintings sell for like squillions of pounds nowadays, don't they? And I guess he's regarded as a genius. Yeah, he lived in poverty. He lived and died in poverty. He never sold any paintings in his life. Then you look in the modern day, you look at someone like the Spice Girls, for example. Pick an example. Here are these talentless dullards, and they're all millionaires. Maybe that's a bit harsh. I don't know. That's not right, is it? Or you look at sportsmen earning millions of pounds, and theirs is striking because they haven't got enough money. That's not right. And there's no prospect of justice in this life, he says. But more than that, he says, in the next life. Verse 17 sounds more promising when he says there's a time for everything, there's a time for judgment. And then verse 18, he says, God is testing men. But what's his conclusion? Verse 19. Well, he says, men and beasts, they're just the same. They both live and die, and they all have the same destination. Verse 20. It's from dust to dust. And if our lives are meaningless, then of course people have no advantage over the animals. If anything, humans are at a disadvantage. If you have a pet and it's comfortable and well fed, it'll generally be happy enough. Your hamster running around on its wheel doesn't have existential angst. It just does it. You won't get your dog singing, I can't get no satisfaction. Okay, because it can't speak, fair enough. And playing the guitar with paws would be difficult. And I guess if they could, they'd be called the Rolling Bones. I don't know. Thank you. And the lead singer would be Mick Wagger. But they don't. They're happy with their life, even though they're doing nothing. And generally in our society, we have all we need. We have roofs over our heads. We have food on the tables. But you go to work tomorrow morning, there won't be people skipping down the road saying, oh, what a beautiful morning. Because they're not satisfied. And all the worldly wisdom is pulled together to consider this great question. And what is the finely tuned, carefully considered, well thought out answer? Verse 21. I don't know. Who knows? He says. Who knows? Sounds like Scooby-Doo. Mm-hmm. You might as well ask Mr. Tumble. Is that exaggerating the secular position? Don't know. Well, I don't think it is. It's been said that All of human philosophy is answering 4 questions. Where are we from? Why are we here? What is right and wrong? And where do we go when we die? And what does the materialist answer to them? Where do we come from? Well, just some cosmic accident. Why are we here? Well, there's no reason to be here. What's right and wrong? That's up to you to decide yourself. There's no ultimate laws. What happens when we die? Well, it's just the end. And they know that's not true. It's the intellectual equivalent of putting your fingers in your ears. And he ends verse 22. I saw there is nothing better than a man should rejoice in his work, for that's his lot. It's not really a rallying call to seize the day. It's more an air of resignation, saying, well, just get on with it. Under the sun, in this life, nothing is fair, and in the next, there's just nothing. And that's a terribly bleak view. And spoiler alert, it's not going to get much better as you go through the book. But that is kind of the point. This is another cigarette being forced into your lungs. So is there an alternative? Well, of course there is. If you're a Christian, by that I mean someone who knows they're a sinner, who knows they've done wrong, who knows they deserve God's punishment, but have turned and trusted in the Lord Jesus Christ, and have seen that he has lived the life they couldn't live, and died the death that you deserve, and your only hope of getting to heaven is through him. If that's you, well, it doesn't mean you swerve all the troubles that there are in the world, but you can have a different perspective. So when we look at no power, well, the seasons of life will happen to you as well. You know, some parts of the church say God reveals all to us, so, you know, we can go along knowing exactly what's going to happen. That's not true. Somebody said God holds the key to all unknown, but he won't give it to you. And since you don't have the key, you must trust him to open the doors. And of course, that's the easier way to remember that he is in control. You know, the hymn In Christ Alone has the line, from life's first cry to final breath, Jesus controls my destiny. And King David knew that in Psalm 31. He says, my times are in your hand. And the Lord Jesus said, all authority in heaven and earth is given to me. And it's good to realise that we have no power, no control over things. But to remember that Jesus came in the fullness of time. And one day he will come to end time. So there's no safer hands to be in. There's no power, there's no point. But the Lord Jesus Christ transforms work from achieving nothing. What does Paul say in 1 Corinthians 10? Whether you eat or drink, whatever you do, all to the glory of God. What about no prospects? Well, in this life we should absolutely care about justice. But remember that God said, vengeance is mine. Of course, we should strive for what is right. But when we have grievances, I think we're encouraged to let them go. Somebody once said the only person you should try and get even with is someone who has helped you. Well, that's good advice. And if we're concerned about justice, we need to look to the cross, where we see God's perfect justice and God's perfect love and God's perfect mercy. And in the next life, if you're a believer, you're not trusting some whim, some vague hope, but you're trusting in the man who said, I am he who lives and was dead, and behold, I'm alive forevermore. And Ecclesiastes shows us all the problems of the world. But these problems are met by the death and the resurrection of the Lord Jesus Christ, and they're resolved there. Which is why we can all look to the power of the cross. And we're going to sing that well-known hymn as we close. This is the power of the cross.